Welcome to a brand new episode of Brain Pickings, our popular podcast for HR professionals, entrepreneurs and leaders. My name is Leslie and I'm the founder of ZigZagHR, supporting you to stay ahead of the curve and challenging you to rethink, reboot and retool HR. Be sure to subscribe to this channel if you're eager for more insights. Big changes are coming to the Belgian special tax status for executives and employees working in Belgium. Under this special tax regime, expats who meet certain conditions were able to benefit from a reduction of Belgian income tax and social security contributions. However, as of 2022, a new tax system enters into force with the ambition to provide more legal certainty. This new regime comes with some new benefits, but also with some limitations, and it will have a significant impact for all companies using this special tax regime as an incentive to attract or retain top talent in Belgium. It can also create opportunities for Belgian companies that are not part of an international group and even for non-profit organizations. In this podcast, you'll learn everything you need to know about this update, because my guest is an expert on this matter, Piet Verswijver, Partner Global Employer Services at Deloitte. How will this new tax status for expats affect your organization? What is the impact on the various business domains, such as reward, finance, and employment law? How do you prepare your organization and your employees that fall under this regime? How do you tackle the communications towards your expat employees? And how can you make use of the existing measures in a high-demanding war for talent? Let's find out. Hello, Piet.
Hello, Leslie.
Everything okay with you?
Thank you. Yeah, fine. And you?
I'm fine, thank you very much. It's been a horrible day this morning because I was completely caught up in traffic jam, but I'm almost over it right now.
Follow. I think we come from the same direction, more or less.
So you were in the same traffic jam. It was horrible. Just a little collision and the whole traffic was a mess. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, Piet, why do we need a special tax regime for expats?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a good question, but also a fair question, because it's about, do we need in Belgium? Do we want to create a sort of exception to our tax system to attract investment, to attract foreign talent, with the aim to actually create additional welfare, well-being for Belgian citizens and also the next generation? So I think it's a very fair question, and maybe a couple of observations there. First of all, if you take a look at the European landscape, a lot of other European countries believe so, because take a look around, a lot of European countries have their own special tax system. The Netherlands has a 30% system, France has a system, Denmark applies a sort of 27% flat tax rate, Spain has a special system up to a certain level with 24%, and I could go on. Italy, Luxembourg, so that's one thing. Yeah. Secondly, I think important, it's still reality. In Belgium, employment cost is still relatively high. If you take a look, we still have a social security system which is uncapped. So employers pay, irrespective of the level of compensation, a certain percentage, but that's uncapped. And from a tax perspective, actually the highest marginal tax rate, which in Belgium is more or less 54%, including communal taxes, kicks in as of a relatively low taxable income, a bit more than 40,000 euros. Yeah. So that's creating a high employment cost, and that's a reality. A third aspect, which I think is also very important, is that in that climate, you need to convince people, employees from outside of Belgium, to come to Belgium. How will you convince them? Let me take an example. If as a company wants to send someone from the US to Belgium, that person is used to maybe a tax percentage which varies between 30 and 37%. In Belgium, that's 54%. 37% only kicks in the US as of $500,000. In Belgium, we spoke about 40,000 euros. So you see that difference. How can you actually convince that person to come to Belgium? Companies have policies to deal with that, but it's difficult, of course, from a reward perspective to convince that person to come to Belgium. And finally, I would say the war for talent, of course. We read in the newspapers last week as well, it's never been so tight, the labor market. It's very tight. The second point is that, maybe that's due to people going on retirement. That we see in Belgium, but at the same time, there is no magic solution. So it needs to come, vacancy do not get filled in, and the solution needs to come from outside of Belgium as well.
Yeah.
And then the big question is that sufficient, what we have today? And then probably you need such kind of system, because also here that Belgium wants to stay and keep the ambition to be a hub for knowledge, innovation, research, development. So we need that extra talent coming outside of Belgium.
Okay, so that's indeed very clear. Now, can you elaborate on this new law? Because the regime that was in place, it has been untouched since 1983, I read. So why did the Belgian federal government decide to change this regime all of a sudden?
Yeah, why changing? And that's an important element, because the previous system had its meritus. It stood for almost 40 years. It's a long time. It's really a long time. And the big thing is that, unfortunately, that system was not embedded into the Belgian legislation. Don't want to get into technical items, but it was not embedded in legislation. It was just like the authority saying, we take an exception and we will allow companies to take advantage of something by creating a fiction of Belgian non-residency.
Yes.
So normally we live in Belgium, we are Belgian residents, taxable on worldwide income, creating a fiction of Belgian non-residency. And the problem was that stood for 40 years, but the last years we saw that actually even within the Belgian authorities there were challenges audited, to what extent that was still true, and also with other countries who have challenged that. So that's one thing. Secondly, also an important point is that it was not open for Belgian nationals. It was not open for all companies. So also there, maybe in terms of multilateral regulations, that probably had reached more or less its end goal. So that's why the change is really important.
Yeah. Why it was necessary. And can you tell us a bit more about the implications of this new law for Belgian companies? How will it affect their organization, and maybe discuss some pitfalls?
Yeah, and maybe let me start with maybe summarizing very briefly what actually the new system is about, and then I would try to summarize and make it very tangible.
Make it a bit structured for us. Yeah.
So actually, where it comes down to is that it's about recruiting people who come from outside of Belgium, or maybe assigned by a company from outside of Belgium to Belgium. That's what we speak about. So what is the benefit and the system about is that up to a maximum of 8 years, 5 plus 3, but it's 8 years, companies can actually pay on top of compensation a 30%, they call it cost proper to the employer, but actually it comes down to they can pay on top of compensation a 30% tax-free allowance, which is a good basis. That comes with some conditions, but limitations. One of the conditions and limitations, or one of the limitations rather, is that 30% is capped to 90,000 euros. That's one thing. There are also a number of conditions. The conditions is that, as we spoke, people now, let's take the example of someone moving for 2 years with his family to Belgium, will become a normal Belgian resident taxable on worldwide income. So that's also something new. A conditions linked to that is that there is a salary threshold, which is an important one, which means that only if an employee is reaching the salary level of 75,000 euros, the person will be eligible for that new system. And 75,000 actually is 100,000, because 75,000 plus the 30%, it's 97,500 to be precise. So that's also one thing. Another condition set is that prior to coming to Belgium, and actually in the 5 years prior to becoming to Belgium, one cannot have lived in a perimeter of 150 kilometers from the Belgian border. So I come back on that later. That's an important element. And also they cannot have paid taxes in Belgium, either as a Belgian resident or a non-resident. So that's something important. The good thing is it's now more open for Belgian nationals as well. It's as well that it's open for all companies, no longer international companies only, non-profit organization, as you were mentioning indeed correctly. So there's an extension on that side. And also there's a transitory measure, because there was, until a couple of weeks ago, a system in place. So there, people who were in that system are able in the next 7 months to make a decision to either go into the new system or not to go into the new system.
Okay.
But it will have implications whatsoever. And the transitory measures still needs to be carved out, and we are waiting for those. But most likely, people who are in the current system will be able to stay for another 2 years.
Okay.
Into the current system. So that's the system as we have. And indeed, and going back to your question on implications
and possible pitfalls
and pitfalls, I think there will be some winners, there will be some losers,
as always.
As always, indeed. Let me give a couple of examples. Today in the system, we spoke about the 150 kilometers. If you have companies who have a lot of people moving from the Netherlands to Belgium, Dutch headquarters, for instance, they may lose out, of course, a lot, because due to that implication or that condition of the 150 kilometers, that's an important element whereby, in reality, people living in the Netherlands, people living in the north of France, even in the industry north environment of Germany, that really will not be able to benefit from the special tax status as we know it today. So that will have huge implications for those companies. The same counts, to give another example, for because and I forgot to mention that, and it's an important one, the salary threshold of 75,000 does not apply to researchers.
Okay.
So that's an exception. But researchers are defined in legislation, but also in the preparatory work. There's a whole set of diplomas qualifying for researcher, as an example. But also there, you may imagine technology specialists, like the skills of today that are really demanded on the market. Technology specialist, there may be software engineer that maybe not be qualifying within that whole set of diplomas that has been set by the legislator. If they do not qualify for that diploma, but also not meeting the salary threshold, they may also get out of the system. And then and we did a sort of analysis within Deloitte based on the current population of expats that we are serving today. The combination of that salary threshold and the combination of the 150 kilometers may result in the fact that 50% of people that are today benefiting from a system may no longer be eligible for the future for that system. So it may have an important impact.
Absolutely.
So that's to give some examples. But of course, in the old system, the benefit of the old system was that people who were, and it was a bit bizarre, but it was working, the more they were traveling for work out of Belgium, the less taxes needed to be paid. And there as well, in that system, old system, of course, there were a lot of expats into Belgium who had a more Belgian role and did not travel a lot. Of course, for them, going into a system where there may be an exemption for 30%, that may be a very important benefit for them, or for the company serving them, going into in the future. So that's an important aspect. In terms of pitfalls, I think a couple of observations, because there is one thing is that it does not, the legislator has built that system, but the problem is that may not fit always into the reward policies of companies. Because as you know as well, companies have developed a reward framework. Most of the companies have a reward framework, which is built on reward policies. It's built on job architecture, job grading. Just to pay someone extra 30% is not that obvious. Or even to translate and to pay 30% less as normal compensation and pay an allowance extra, because that may have implications on legal social security benefits, on occupational pensions. That may have an impact on short-term bonus payments, long-term incentive eligibility, etc. So there's a whole complexity around that, and so that means that if companies implement the system, they will need to customize that depending on the individual. And of course, we can help as Deloitte, but it's an important implication that needs to be thought about.
Sounds like a lot of work.
A lot of work. At the same time, I think there are ways around. So that's good. But of course, the companies, do they want to accept that? Do they really want to take that as an extra work? That's something that may be challenged. But again, hopefully the legislator will, or let's say the authorities, the authorities may come in and actually interpret the legislator in a more collaborative way. And that's what I'm hoping that will happen.
Okay. All right. Other pitfalls, other implications that are worth mentioning?
I think another one is of course, what I was saying is not as counting as well for Belgian companies, but is equally important for international companies. And of course, it may be even be more challenged also in terms of international employment, because maybe HR people in Belgium will need the help from their colleagues outside of Belgium as well. So there as well, I think the whole change management and communication structure will be very, very important.
Yeah. Okay. So how, according to you, can organizations make use of these new measures in this high demanding war for talent? Will this new law actually help Belgian companies in the war for talent? Is it, what I mean is it aligned with neighboring countries? You talked about the Netherlands, for instance. Can you elaborate a bit on that matter?
Yeah, it's a good one because, as I mentioned, the labor market in Belgium is tight. So one of the most obvious solutions would be to appeal to the labor market existing in neighboring countries. And I think that would be very important. But as we mentioned, that 150 kilometer perimeter rule will not help into that. And a bit unfortunately, because I think what the legislator has saw this more from a half glass perspective, wanted to tackling potential abuse in the future. Whilst probably it could have been, I believe, a good opportunity, and then if I may use the expression, to keep the shop in Belgium open, while the Netherlands actually has closed the shop, because the Netherlands has also that kind of 150 kilometer rule, but Belgium could have kept it open. So that could have been something important in the war for talent. As I mentioned, the salary level of 75 is quite high. So that also has an impact to what extent it will help in the war of talent. So that's also an important one. On the flip side, the scope has been enlarged, Belgian nationals. So there may be talent that was out of Belgium for a couple of years that may come back.
Now,
Let's see how that goes. That's one thing. Another part of the flip side is that it's open for all companies now, but also non-profit organizations. So that's also something that may be an important help in the war for talent as well. But where I believe that the Belgian government maybe actually scored sort of own goal is with that limit of the cap of the 90,000. Because I'm a strong believer in the 25 years I'm working in this business, is that it's actually the C-suite, the executives that decide where investment is going. So that rule is potentially heavily impacting C-suite level, and of course that is something where I strongly believe that hopefully over time the legislator will potentially say that was maybe sort of too stringent application, and we'll see how that evolves into the future, because it's an important one. Talent attracts talent.
Absolutely.
And of course, it's the C-suite who decides where investment is going. And if they don't strongly believe for themselves that Belgium is the place to be, okay, guess what may happen. So that's certainly something that may be important as well.
Okay. Now,
but if I just may, because you also mentioned in terms of the Netherlands, in comparison to the Netherlands, I think if I could mention it a bit in football terms, we're behind the Netherlands now. Because the Netherlands
we don't like to hear that.
No, me neither. Me neither. Because in the Netherlands, they also have a 30%. But what they have done there is that they have accepted, and with the appreciation of the Dutch authorities, that in total compensation, that 30% is deemed to be included in the total compensation. While Belgium is now requiring an on top of payment. I hope again that the Belgian authorities will say, change. Okay, we also accept that it can be included on what existing in compensation. So that's an important one. Secondly, the Netherlands as well has that 30% regulation, but without a cap of the 90,000. So that's also an important one. The Netherlands has a capped social security system. So there is some differentiation. Belgium is winning because we go for 8 years. The Netherlands only has 5 years. But I think there is something to do there.
Yeah, so it's not aligned with our neighboring country.
I think that it had the goal to align one way or another. But to my in Belgium it became part of the budgetary conclusions as well, and probably for budgetary reason that has been put in there. But it's at this stage, I'm afraid it's not aligned.
Okay. Now we kind of talked about this new regime, and although you did a magnificent job in providing us with some clarity on the matter,
not always
to
easy.
me, well, yeah, it still seems quite complex. I think it also requires change management skills. What would you advise? What would be your major advice for HR professionals that are confronted with this situation? Which actions can they take according to you, or should they take according to you?
I think a couple of points. First of all, in the short term, very important is that it may actually impact people who have a status now, have a special tax status. So that is the element of good communication, of change management, because there is a choice to be made.
Yeah,
a choice to be made, and certainly may have impact also from a personal perspective, because today there's a fiction of non-residency. People move to residency, so they may become taxable on worldwide income. So there's a whole set of, and it's sensitive. As a company, you need also to go for that application, but it may impact personal situation of the individual. So there is some sensitivity in dealing with that. So communication is crucial, and the change management, as you also refer to, is very important. The good thing is there is a special tax state. Because also the authorities could have decided, or the legislature could have decided, we abolish the old system and we don't bring something new. So there's something new. And so also,
let's keep it positive.
Absolutely, and that also means that people need to, or let's say HR professionals need to think about, if we hire someone from outside of Belgium, okay, can we make benefit of what is existing? And then the point is that there are ways around. There is just some things to think about. And the contractual aspect will be very important, be it in the employment agreement, be it in an assignment letter or an addendum. That's an important element. The reward implications, how can we make that fit in our reward framework? That's an important one. But I think it's still working. And the most important is, well, I would say, stay tuned, because it's relatively fresh legislation. The authorities, together with the legislator, has took up the challenge to embed special tax status into legislation, which was not obvious. And of course, over time, I hope, and practice will actually reveal that some things need to be looked at and interpreted in a certain way. And I still hope that that can be done in a sort of very collaborative way.
Okay, I think that's an important key message also to take away in a collaborative way. I think that's very important. Thank you so much, Piet, for sharing your expertise on this new expat regime, which still to me is very complex. But I think people need to stay tuned, as you said, and make sure that they know what's going on and that they prepare, that they communicate, that they take time to see what this actually will mean for them and for their employees. Okay. Thank you very much. This was yet another episode of our ZigZagHR podcast. If you're eager to stay ahead of the curve and help pivot your organization towards a very exciting future, be sure to tune in again and listen to other inspiring and interesting podcast episodes on this channel. Most important thing, you know, it's a great time to be in HR. Talk to you soon.